My Gavanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to the fifth from last faction overview for version 4.5, the realm of Lothlorien. So, Lothlorien begins, as you would expect, in Lothlorien. They have their capital city of Caras Galadon, and they have Lim here. And do note, again, a note on pronunciation. Everyone can pronounce them however they want, and even I used to pronounce things very, very, very wrong. I harken back to the days where I didn't know how to pronounce Aule in the Dwarf Lore video. But it is pronounced Caras Galadon, not Galadon. It's a TH sound, not a D. Now, some people will tell me that it's actually Galathon, but I'm pretty sure it's Galadon, but that's just off the top of my head. So again, I've probably not even gone far enough. But anyway, you start with Caras Galadon, and you start with Lim here, so only 2 provinces. You'll note that the army size within those is quite small. Lord Celeborn with a couple of Lorean Archers and Warders, or a couple of units, one being Archers, one being Warders. And in Lim here, High March Warden Haldir with another unit of Lorean Archers, so a very, very small garrison. You do get Kofneben over here, your spy, which is nice, but you don't get a diplomat. You are a nation with a family tree, as you might expect, Galadriel being the wife, of course, of Lord Celeborn, their first daughter, Celebrian, who has not died, but for the game's purposes she has, because she sailed off to Aman some time ago, and then a fake daughter, Iarwen, and another one, Calmiriel, so that Haldir can be married in. Now, it is something at the moment of a project to expand family trees, so in future there will probably be the odd extra child in here, but we are quite keen on Lothlorien having only the 2 starting generals, so there is that. The victory conditions for Lothlorien in the long campaign are to hold only 20 regions, and you have to defeat Mordor and Dol Guldur. A theme throughout the game for the good nations in the long campaign is defeating Mordor. They are the enemy of Middle-earth in the Third Age, and it is they that must fall. So the bigger nations, the more world-spanning nations, such as the Elves, do tend to have to defeat Mordor in order to win. The custom generals then, Lord Celeborn. First of all, let's look at his campaign model, sorry. This is what Lord Celeborn looks like. That is not specific to Lord Celeborn, that is just what your faction leader looks like. A generic general is represented by Haldir over here. You'll note they are remarkably similar, with the only difference really being your faction leader doesn't wear a helmet. And a captain looks like that in the wonderful grey colouring of Lothlorien, as we shall see later on. Their bodyguards, Lord Celeborn comes with Berio Ngalaith. They are not the standard bodyguard unit. They are a fearsome and very powerful unit. And they are the Lothlorien, they are the Alliance unit, as we shall see in a minute, because the campaign is very similar to the Woodland Realm. High March Warden Haldir comes with Galadrim Archers, so again, not the stock bodyguard unit, a very good unit. Now do note that, again, in version 5, bodyguard units will be addressed throughout the campaign, and we will give a lot more custom bodyguards out at the start of the game, because that's a point of variety that we love, so they will be expanded. But for Lothlorien, you already get 2 custom. The area that you start in then, of course, is bordered by the Anduin, and that makes up a large chunk of your gameplay. The nearest crossing to you is at the north. Now, a key indicator, something we added for the Anduin, is if you want to know where to cross the river, generally speaking, there will be a fort there to mark the crossing. So, for example, there's a fort here giving that one, there's a fort here giving that one, and then other crossing points further north than that. It's not actually going to show me because it's easier to go that way. But the next nearest crossing point is all the way up there, and again, there's another fort and marking it, and you can always cross at the Carrock, so that's always known. But there's only a few crossing points. Something that's very pertinent to Lothlorien in 4.5, although it may have come in version 3, so do excuse me on that, is the river. Lothlorien is now completely bounded by the rivers, with only the 3 bridge crossings, so it's a very defensive campaign, as the battle map will testify as well. You've also, of course, got the Misty Mountains on the west. Now, there's a lot of call at the moment to open up a pass through the Misty Mountains that does not have a town in it. And I've been giving some thought and consideration to that, and I'll discuss that with the team in due course. But at the moment, you can only get across to the western side of the mountains by either going all the way down and through the gap, or taking Khazad-dûm or Goblin Town. Those are the only crossings. Or, of course, all the way at the north, but that's bloody miles away. You're not going to be going up there anytime soon. Rebel regions around you then, of course, you've got Arui to the north, you've got Cnodiorn, and you've got Edraichan to the south. Rochberg and Tirith Anduin are also both available when you play as Lothlórien. In most of the time, Rohan takes those in the turn 1 auto expansion, but not when you are Lothlórien. They are free. So you've got a lot of Rebel expansion before you meet your chief enemy of Dol Guldur. And before we get on to enemies, let us look at your custom settlements. Caras Galadhon is, of course, a custom settlement, and you'll be very pleased to know, if you follow the preview channel on the Discord thread, that as of yesterday, Caras Galadhon has had an overhaul, and RK has created a wonderful settlement, far more fitting of the heart of Elvendom on Earth, and the city's battle map now is fantastic. But it is custom even in version 4.5. These videos are rapidly turning into developer diaries. I shouldn't do that really. But we are coming to the end of the line now, so it's easy to see the differences. But Caras Galadhon is custom, Khazad-dûm is custom, chiefly Dol Guldur is custom. Dol Guldur is a bit of a ball ache as a battle map though, and isn't a fantastic one. And arguably it's actually a nuisance and not a useful defensive battle map, so that's due an overhaul as well. Outside of that, though, Elven cities are, of course, custom for as far as the mod is concerned. We have added them in the mod, but they will all be the same. So every Elven town looks like every Elven town, but they will still at least have, you've got unique Elven buildings, and they tend to have walkways in them that you can use. I think that may be restricted to the castle version of your settlements. But the castles tend to have walkways that begin at the town square and sort of meander out to the walls, so that you can put archers up on these walkways, fire over the walls at your enemy, and then fire down on the enemy as they make their way through the city. And the enemy can't mount these walls without getting to the town centre first. So they make excellent defensive features. So neighbours and diplomacy then, let's start with your diplomacy. You are allied to the dwarves of Khazad-dûm and the kingdom of Rohan, and you're at war with Dol Guldur, and that is it. So you're not yet at war with Mordor, which is the chief enemy you are likely to face, and you are not yet at war with the goblins of Moria. But the goblins of Moria, depending on how well Khazad-dûm do, and in version 4.5 they will generally always hold at Khazad-dûm, they probably won't ever lose it. Which means that goblins may not ever really threaten you, for the nearest actual region is Goblin Town, so they may not be a threat. Your chief and most long-lived enemy will be Dol Guldur, and it depends how quickly you wish to see them out. You can, of course, try and muster up a force early doors, rush them out of the game, take Dol Guldur. Without Dol Guldur, they are a scorpion without a sting. They present very little threat, so it's key to take that away from them. It also stops their replenishing Nazgul by taking Dol Guldur, so it's a key location for you to capture. And it's also important for you, because some of your best units train from there. So it's wise to try and take that as early as you can. But of course it will invoke their wrath, and you may not have enough troops to meet the firestorm they raise to try and reclaim it. So do just watch out for that. Turning to then the economy and building side of the overview, you are elves, so as of 4.5 nothing is restricted. You can build all tiers of everything, even castles now. In terms of guilds, though, you don't really have many at all. You've got the Warriors Guild, which gives you the melee weapon and then the morale bonus, as it does for most nations. And you do get a Dance Guild, but note, even though it's called a guild, it isn't actually a guild. It is a... Oh, no. I'm thinking of I'm thinking of the Woodland Realm building. That's totally unrelated, and Lothlórien I don't actually think get. Let's just double check. No, indeed. So I'm thinking of the wrong building. The Dance Guild is a guild, and it gives a population growth, a population order, and culture increase. And down the tiers, it just gets stronger with each of those. And that does remain a guild. So it's just a little economic boost. And a growth boost, which is quite helpful. Outside of that, though, you don't really get any unique buildings as Lothlórien, save for the one that comes, of course, with their main feature, which we shall discuss in a moment. You don't get the advanced blacksmith because you are elves, but something I didn't mention in the Woodland Realm overview is that both you and the Woodland Realm, whilst you don't get an advanced blacksmith, if you are able to take Ostin Adil, you are able to put the knowledge of the High Elves to your use, and you can upgrade your units to an extra tier there. But of course, it's quite far away, even though it's, as the crow flies, it's very close, very, very close indeed. But as in terms of gameplay, it's actually miles away. It might as well be in the heart of Mordor, to be honest, because you've got to go through Khazad-dûm to get it. But if you can get there, you do get an armor increase bonus. Your diplomat trains out of Caras Galadhon from the Mirror of Galadriel. The nearest location to you to get other diplomats will be Khazad-dûm or Dol Guldur. if you need more, but people rarely do. You don't get ships other than, of course, the mercenary cog that everyone gets, but your ports do not give you ships. Primarily because we don't want anyone sailing the Anduin, because the AI builds boats on the Anduin that can't actually do anything, and it just nerfs them because they've got this upkeep of boats to maintain, even though they don't even use them. Of course, you can't make it past the Falls of Hrauros, which a lot of people do ask. They say, well, can you please make it so that we can sail the full length of the Anduin? But I ask you, alright, granted, there's many accounts in history where nations have deliberately taken their boats ashore, dismantled them, walked them around waterfalls, rebuilt them and moved on. But there's no examples of that in Middle-earth, and whilst that is something that they could do, they wouldn't be doing that in a turn. That would take ages, and it would have to be a really concerted effort to want to maintain naval dominion. And we just don't think that's worthwhile. So we've quite rightly just said you can't sail past the Falls of Hrauros because they are too... you wouldn't be able to. You've seen the Falls of Hrauros. So we don't let boats on the northern side of the Anduin, but also the Elves of Lothlórien and the Woodland Realm don't really have much seafaring knowledge, bar the Sindar that rule them, I suppose, so we've just gone with them not being a naval nation. Bringing us then to gameplay events, and of course it is the script, the Elven Alliance. So the Elven Alliance is very simple. You want to ally with the Woodland Realm, and then around turn 40 you will get a message to say, haha, our allies in the other encampment have learnt that our capital is going to come under attack, and they've offered their aid. Will you accept it? Will you reject it? And at that point, you're just accepting free troops or not. So if you say yes, then some Woodland Realm units will spawn in your capital, and then a turn or so after that, you'll be attacked by a large army. Now, it's very easy to defeat that army. Well, I say it depends how prepared you are. It's relatively easy to defeat that army, so you should be all right, but it will attack you. And then after that it says, this has worked out quite well, should we consider actually forming a more solid alliance? And you can say yes or no. And if you say yes, you then unlock the Sylvan Gathering building, which we've seen already. The Sylvan Alliance encampment. It gives you Woodland Horse Archers, it gives you Elder Council, who are a Javelin and Spear unit, it gives you Woodland Sentinels, who are an Archer unit, and it gives you Elven King's Gate Guard, who are a pretty damn fine unit. Generally speaking, it gives you a few units that are either better than your own equivalent or plug a gap that you don't have. You can, however, reject it, and in rejecting the alliance, you just break your actual alliance with the Woodland Realm, and you unlock the ability to train Celeborn's bodyguard, the Berio y Ingalaith, which means Protectors of the Trees. As it's written there, actually. Haha, I got one right for once. Protectors of the Trees. So you unlock those, and they're an absolutely fantastic unit. So it's a mix-up. Do you want the best unit that you can possibly get, or do you want a few extra units from the Woodland Realm? So that's the Elven Alliance script in a nutshell. Now, the Sylvan Alliance building and the Berio y Ingalaith can only be built in Caras Galadon, Dol Guldur, and Thranduil's Halls. So there's only 3 locations that you will get either the building or the unit, depending on which path you've chosen. So they're rare in any event, anyway. Now that concludes the campaign side of Lothlórien, but I did just want to mention that in future versions, we are going to change the Elven Alliance script to make it one where you actually subsume the other elven nation. We discussed this as modders. Hummingbird was a voice against, but Harkay and I were voices for. Others abstained, and so in that instance we thought, well, why the hell not? It's a very minor little change, and we're going to make it a player option. So in future you'll be given the option at the end of the Elven Alliance script, which will likely be reworked a touch to make it possibly a touch longer. But it'll be reworked that you get the option of actually just joining the other nation. So it'll be like the Kalmar Union that you all know and love and always tell us to use for the reunited kingdom. But this time it won't matter that your banners and names and everything won't change, because you're just going to, as I say, subsume the other nation. So if you're playing as Lothlórien and you accept the alliance, you will be given all of the other elven nations' stuff. But that is in the future. That isn't now. But I wanted to mention that because many people suggest that in these videos, and I just want to cut you off and say, yep, we're thinking of doing that anyway. But for the moment, all you unlock is the building or the unit. Right, as I say, and as happily mentioned in the last episode, I'm not going to tell you how difficult Lothlórien is, and instead I've put up, hopefully, a YouTube poll, and it will be for all of you to say whether you think it is a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So the video gets an awful lot of views normally. These are the most popular videos on the channel, actually. But they tend to get the most views in the first 24 hours. So cast your vote and then remember to come back a day later and see what the consensus was. And that's something I'm going to do moving forward. Now, do note, just as this is the first one, so I will mention it here, to my experience and understanding, YouTube polls are blocked by ad blockers. So you may not see them. You may not see the poll, unfortunately. I've just had accounts of some people saying that they can't see it on the computer, but they can see it on their phone, and the general difference being their computer has an ad block and the phone doesn't. It could well be something to do with your browser as well. I'm not sure. I have no idea, really. I don't work for YouTube. I don't know how their polls work, but I just know that some people can't see them. But to actually access the poll, there should be a little icon in the top right corner of the screen, and you can just click it and cast your vote. So, without any further ado, let us now move over to the battle map and have a look at the mass grey army that Lothlórien fields. Welcome then to Lothlórien's battle map. So a quick overview shows you you're not a cavalry nation. It's the one thing you don't really do. Yeah, you've got 2 horse units, but they're both earlier tier, and they're nowhere near as numerous as the mainline infantry or indeed the archers that you get. But note, you do get ends, which we will discuss later. But your first tier, starting you off, are the defensive and offensive variants of Lothlórien. But let's just take a brief moment to address the absolute beauty that is Lothlórien banner, and indeed the grey colouring of Lothlórien. I absolutely love it. I've spoken about this many times, and I'm going to say it again because it's one of my favourite facts, and that is that Lothlórien is a forest primarily made up of malorn trees, and malorn trees have grey bark. So the elves of Lothlórien dress head to toe in grey to blend in with their primary natural surrounding, and that is why your army is all grey, and I just think that's fantastic. And it's mentioned in the book. Haldir and his company are mentioned as being dressed in grey when they ambush the Fellowship, or the remnants of, when they make it to Lothlórien. But anyway, Lorean Warders are the first. They are your spear unit, early tier. Attack of 6, charge of 4, defense of 16. Now, before we begin, we've already begun, but as we begin, Lothlórien are the defensive wild elf nation. And the Woodland Realm are the offensive wild elf nation. So the Woodland Realm has much lower defense overall, but generally speaking has a higher attack and charge. And the Realm of Lothlórien has a lower attack and charge, but much better defense. And it reflects your defensive nature. But we have opted for the Woodland Realm to be the better archers, even though in truth we are well aware this is one complete transgression, as Lothlórien are said to be the better archers. And Galadriel even gives Legolas a better bow than his own people use, which actually is the only point that suggests Lothlórien are better. It could well just be that Galadriel herself is a master bowmaker, but it's unlikely. They probably should be better archers, but we have it as the Woodland Realm as the better archers. So do note that. But anyway, Lorean Warders, 16 total offense, and a 6 attack's not bad for a spearman. 115% movement because you're elves. Good morale response. Again, elves tend to be ready for battle because they know why they're staying behind. They know what's on the line, so they fight to the last. They get a bonus against mounts, and specifically they get a bonus against the black mounts of the Ulairi, which the only unit you will face that really has that mount is Camul's Bodyguard. And if you allow Dol Guldur to live till the end game and they get any Shadow Knights out, then also the Shadow Knights, because that is Camul's Bodyguard. So that is a minor feature, really. But the Lorean sentries are the more aggressive version, so a 7 attack and a 4 charge with a 15 defense. Now, of course, there's a lot hidden that you don't really see, so even though these two units have remarkably similar stats, with only a point difference between them, swordmen are better at killing than spears. There's a hidden spear trait which you give to spear units, which affects their ability against cavalry. The higher that trait is, the better they are against cavalry, but the offset is that they fight worse against infantry. And there's a few of these little hidden traits at play, and that is one such. So even though there's only a single point between the two attacks of these two units, you will find that against ground units, the sentries will kill so much more than the warders. So they are primarily an anti-cav and defensive unit. They will hold the line, but they might not kill very much. But they don't need to kill very much because you've got the sentries and you've also got your first archer, the Lorean Archers. Now, of course, the Woodland Realm are better archers than Lothlórien, but Lothlórien are still in that absolute uber tier of archers because they are elves. The only reason we make elves so fantastic is, one, because Tolkien does seem to suggest that elves actually are very good archers. They have a natural ability because of their incredibly keen eyesight, but also they've had literally thousands of years to master archery. And archery is a skill that does that practice can take you from a novice to an absolute master in a short frame of time, and they've had thousands of years to perfect it. So they are, generally speaking, better than everyone else. And that's normally reflected in them having a slightly more range at the tier that they tend to come in, and they have better accuracy. Now again, there's a bit of a hidden stat here. They have average accuracy, but that should have a caveat of, in brackets, Elven, because every Elven unit has better accuracy per tier than anyone else. So an average archer for the humans will have worse accuracy than an average Elven archer. So it's only a minor degree of increase, but you will just note that as the elves, you will kill thousands of orcs, who will be your primary enemy, with archers, and with a human with average accuracy, you may only kill 500 or something like that. So they're better than everyone else, even if they are still only average. They're average compared to other elves. Their melee attack is 5, missile is 6, which is as good as most human nations' best archer as your starting archer. And their total defense, though, is 10. So they do suffer significantly from being shot back at, because their armor is only 4. So you do have to watch out with Lorean Archers. They don't like to be shot at. That will see them end. And then we move on to the first cavalry unit, Lorean Scouts. Now, as I say, the Elven Alliance plugs gaps in your roster, and one such gap for Lorien is you don't have any horse archers. You have to rely on the Woodland Realm to bring those if you particularly want them. So your Lorean Scouts are a starter sword and shield cavalry unit, which, with the changes we're making to the charge bonus in version 5, will see this unit have a relatively poor charge indeed. But an attack of 6 and a defense of 13, they're not terrible cavalry, and cavalry's charge primarily is affected by the horse itself, and being on one gives you a relatively good charge, so they do have that as well. Note faster movement speed again. The cost as well, elves generally are a bit expensive, and we try and make them prohibitively expensive, so your armies are overall quite small, because elves, of course, there aren't many of them. But overall, they're not a fantastic cavalry unit, but they are a steadfast cavalry unit. The defense of 13 for your starting cav is really useful, and it means that if you accidentally forget them in battle, which I do all the time, they might actually survive for a little while. And then we come on to the tier 1.5, and this is where your two very unique units come in, both of them with a worship of death. The first being the Gorthinen, and the second being the Gor Veleg. So the Gorthinen are masters of the ambush. So they have this sort of double-handed glaive, which we do throw in because why not? Variety is the spice of life. I know some people hate them, but I think they look cool. And that's about all you can do sometimes, is think it looks cool. As long as it's not too egregious, like a dwarf riding a goat. They frighten nearby enemy infantry, and they can hide anywhere. So they're ambush specialists, as I say. They're going to affect the enemy morale by A, appearing out of thin air, and B, frightening them anyway. So they're quite good at breaking the enemy. They have an insane attack of 12. Their charge is 6, which for a foot unit is very good. I think the highest foot charge unit in 4.5 is around 8. So they're up there with one of the best charges of a ground unit. Their defense is only 14, which could be a touch better, really. I mean, we've seen defenses of 15 and 16, so they're let down a touch in that. But really, they're just fantastic shock infantry that have the ability to hide anywhere. Now, they're not armor-piercing, so it's morale damage they're mostly going to do. They're going to hit the enemy hard with a high attack and a high charge. After appearing out of thin air and frightening them anyway, they will likely cause many units to break if used well. But I grant you, hiding anywhere it's not actually that tricky to use when you realise that the AI is always going to try and flank you. So putting them out on the flank means they will be in the path of a unit trying to flank you. So it is often best to put them on the side you don't think the enemy is going to try and flank on, or even just further afield so that they avoid the flanking forces as well. But of course, the further away they are, the less likely, the less effect their appearing out of nowhere will do. They cost 900, which is relatively expensive, but they have 125 movement speed though, so they're going to chase down their enemy really quite swiftly. And they're just a very cool unit, and there's a little pronunciation guide there, which is very, very bare bones, but I thought it's worthwhile throwing them in, and every Sindarin named unit does have that. You'll also note that it does tell you what their name means in English, which is Silent Death in this case, because lots of people moan when the name is not in English, because lots of people, I think, are linguistically ignorant. And then we move on to Gor Veleg, which means Great Death. And this unit is an absolute one of a kind. As you'll note from their icon, they fire more than one arrow per shot, which I grant you is highly unrealistic because the force is dissipated between the 3 arrows and each of them therefore ends up being much worse. But this is a fantasy realm, so sod it. They get a bonus against mounts. They're effective against armor. Their arrows are body piercing and they shoot more than one arrow at a time. They are basically ballistae bolts fired from a bow. They are that good. They're so powerful. I'll definitely try and keep them out of the group so that we can actually use them here to show you what they do. But they only have 70-meter range, so the javelin level range. They are exceptional with their accuracy, which is the highest they can possibly be, and they only fire 4 missiles. But what they are is assassins, basically. There is not a single unit in the game that can withstand a volley from the Gor Veleg. They will drop anything. Trolls, Sauron, Mumakil, well, Mumakil especially. Mumakil are awful against archers. That's a bad example. Dark Numenorians, the Shadow Knights of Dol Guldur, any elite unit you can think of, even the Balerion Honor Guard, the game's currently best unit, tied up there with the Eregian Smiths. Even those 2 units would fall like kindling before the axe that is the Gor Veleg. They are just a fantastic unit, but they are quite difficult to use because they have such a small range. Now, do also note that the scatter shot is very, very cool, and each arrow is actually an arrow, but they are very, very inaccurate. So we've given them exceptional accuracy because basically we have to, because one of the shots that you fire will be accurate and the other 2 will just go absolutely anywhere. So they need to be close, primarily so they don't kill your own men, but there is a little bit of a risk that they might do that. But I'll try and show them off today because they're a very cool unit and there's no other unit in the mod like them. Right, and then we move on to your main tier. I think the Barracks event comes in somewhere around here. But remember, the Barracks event is gone in the next version, so don't worry too much about that. And then we come to Yavanna's Chosen and Sentinels of Caer Amroth. Now again, the Sentinels, or not again, sorry, but I'm thinking of other videos I've done. They are a beefed up version of the Lorean Sentries, so just a better sword and shield unit. They have an 11 attack, a 5 charge, and a 22 defense versus the 7, 4, and 15 of the Sentries. They don't cost double, but they are of course much more expensive though. But they're just a much better unit, a very solid mid-tier unit, one of the better middle-tier units that you will come across. They still get the speed boost being elves, which is always very nice, and they just look very cool. Keeping with the grey theme, they wear chainmail, but they do have a bit of a green colour ebbs in at this tier as well, which is good because it separates visually the tiers. They are supported by Yavanna's Chosen, which is a unit made up entirely of ladies, and they will speak, hopefully, with a feminine voice. The sound files, I think, work. Sometimes they do default to a masculine voice, but they should, generally speaking, always speak with a woman's voice, as they are entirely women. They're effective against armor. They get a bonus against mounts. They're a halberd unit, is all I really need to say. 19 total defense is fantastic. 9 attack is fantastic. 5 charge doesn't matter with halberd units. The charge doesn't matter anyway. They cost 1,100, but they are an excellent unit. They will take on cavalry, they will take on ground infantry, they will hold the line against whatever you want. They're a very key unit in the middle of your roster, and one you should use as often as you can, because they're worthwhile. And they are supported by your next dedicated real archer, the Lothlorien March Wardens. So the Lothlorien March Wardens are just fantastic archers. 8 missile attack, 34 missiles, 230 meter range, exceptional accuracy, 14 defense, 6 of which is armor, and a 9 melee attack if the enemy arrives. So, of course, the total defense is a little lower. The other units at this tier are 22 and 19, but with an 8 missile attack at only your mid-tier, that's just phenomenal. This unit will waste anything that the enemy has to offer, and it's not even your best archer. So a very, very useful unit indeed. And then your last cavalry unit also comes in now, which is the Hitharbeen, which means Mist Knights, and named, obviously, of course, for Galadriel's famous act of covering the Anduin in mist, so that Eorl and his Eored could make it south and support Gondor without being seen by prying eyes of the mountains. They inspire your forces. Otherwise, though, they're not actually a fantastic cavalry unit. They're decidedly average. Secondary attack of 7, their main attack of 8, charge of 9, which is very good, and a defense of 18, which is very good. They are good cavalry, but of course, because they are your best cavalry unit, it shows that you're not a real cavalry nation. There are far better cavalry units for other nations, as you would expect. But still, for you, they're a fantastic unit. But they only come from Caras Galadon or Amun Lank. So very, very restricted, which is another feature at play with you being not a cavalry nation. Only one of your horse units comes everywhere. The other one, potentially two, if you side with the Woodland Realm, you get their horse archers. The other two are both restricted, so you really don't have very many cavalry options. You've got to use your archers primarily. But then we come to your elite tier, the unit that many of you will recognise, and that is, of course, because it uses the design of the films. And these are the elves that went to Helm's Deep in the film only. They didn't go there in the books, of course. I've seen some people moan that we have used the armour design from the film, but not given them the weapons that the film uses. And I just think that's absolutely bizarre. I don't understand that at all. That is what the unit looks like. What does it matter if it's using a sword or a spear? That is what the unit looks like, is my thinking. But obviously, it's everyone each can think what they will. And I am not to dissuade you of your own beliefs, but just stop moaning to me about it, because we're not going to change it. But anyway, Gallatin Swordmen are the first one. They are a two-handed sword, so no shield, so watch out for arrow fire. 15 attack, 8 charge, 24 defense. They're very good late-game shock infantry with a locked morale, so they can't run away. 110% movement speed, which is pretty nice, pretty tasty, but they are very costly. Of course, they're not armor-piercing. You have very few armor-piercing options as Lothlorien, actually. It's one of your weaknesses. So we've only really seen the Gor Veleg and Yavanna's Chosen having armor-piercing so far, which is not many. But the Gallatin Swordmen will still cut through anything, particularly in the early game, although it's not them that you get, is it? It's the archers. Because they are, of course, a very late-game unit, but you do get the archers in the early game, but we'll see them in a second. But they're supported by the Gallatin Guards, who used to be spear and shield, but are now an upgraded version of Yavanna's Chosen, and are a halberd again. So this is your third and last armor-piercing unit. I think the Bodyguard might have an armor-piercing weapon, I can't quite remember. But anyway, they're skilled against mounts, effective against armor, they're halberds, attack of 10, charge of 5, 26. They are, as I say, just a direct upgrade of Yavanna's Chosen. They cost only 200 more for the pleasure as well, so always get these over Yavanna's if you can, because they're worth it. But do note they have locked morale, so they won't run away, so sometimes they will fight to the death, even when you don't want them to, so do watch out for that. And then supporting them, as I say, are your best archer units, your best, most readily available archer unit. I caveat that, because of course the Engolith are actually your best. But the Gallatin Archers, this is the bodyguard of Haldir of Lothlorien. They have an 11 melee attack and a 22 defense, which means that when they finish with their bows, they are your best sword and shield unit. Tied exactly with the Sentinels of Caran Amroth, because they have identical stats. But do note that actually when they finish with their bows, they don't have a shield. They are a two-handed sword unit by the looks of it. So watch out for that, you don't have a shield. So the Sentinels are still slightly better in the defensive department because of the shield. The Gallatin Archers are relying on their high armor stat to make up that 22 total defense. A 10 missile attack is fantastic. And the lower stats, 220 on the range, very high accuracy, 32 missiles. This is a deliberate point. So the Lothlorien March Wardens are actually your best archer overall, where archery is considered. So do note that the archers, the Galadrim archers, do have a higher missile, but the March Wardens have better everything else. So they're more accurate, further range, more missile. So they'll just do a touch better overall, I should submit. But if the enemy actually arrives to fight you, then the Galadrim Archers are infinitely better than the March Wardens. So Archers are just a fantastic archer unit. Really, 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 really up there. One of the best. They cost 1,200, which is costly, and their upkeep is likely about 600 as well. So they are going to cost you a lot. And Haldir is a chief component in the fact that you don't make much money as Lothlorien at the start of the game, because he costs so much just to keep running. So do try and keep him in a fort if you can. And then we come to the Berio Iengolith, the Guardians or Protectors of the Trees, the Bodyguard of Celeborn, and the unit available if you reject the Woodland Realm. They are a phenomenal unit, and they look really cool. I like their design. So no, indeed, they're spear and shield when they finish with their bows. So they have fantastic archer skills, missile attack of 10, 220 meters, very high accuracy, 32 missiles. So they are as good, as the archers in terms of ranged combat. But when they finish with their range, though, they're quite possibly one of the best spear units we have. 33 total defense, 16 melee attack is insane for a spear unit. We deliberately lower the attack on spear units because their defense and the animations of spears are again the same reason we do it for pikes, is that they're so good at staying alive that if they have a high attack as well, then they're basically untouchable. But because this unit is so rare, that is on purpose. So with their high melee, a very good charge of 7, and a defense of 33, they are phenomenal units. And it really does make it a hard decision. Do you want 4 extra units for variety and to plug a few holes you have, or do you want one of the best units that the game has? It's the choice that you have to make. And they're a very cool unit, but remember, you do get to play with them for as long as you keep Celeborn alive. You get this unit, I like doing that. I like giving late game units early so that you get a taste of what you might get later on. But they're just a very, very good unit. Now, your actual bodyguard is an archer again. They are Elbereth's Sentinels. They're just archers and then a two-handed sword again when they finish. So they are essentially just a slightly better but smaller version of Gallatin Archers. Melee attack of 11, missile of 11, defense of 28, 220, exceptional, 32, slightly better accuracy than the Gallatin Archers. Recruitment cost, don't worry about that. Every general always costs 1,000. Their upkeep, I couldn't tell you because the upkeep varies nation to nation. But they are, of course, a general's unit. Do note that your general's unit is locked, so your general will not run away unless you tell him to, which means if you can't tell him to, he is dead. But a very good bodyguard unit nevertheless. And then I've tapped the Ents on here. I think we went over them in the Woodland Realm overview. They have an attack of 45, a charge of 15, total defense of 41. They have 7 hit points. They are hard to kill. They are trolls now, so they will not crash your game, but it also means that they don't suffer from pikes or spear units. They don't have a negative against those kinds of units anymore because they're now infantry. They're very, 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 very good, and I believe you can train them from the town of Rochberg. I don't know which building they train from, I can't recall that, but it's either that you get them as mercenaries from the Rochberg region, or you can train them from a building in the Rochberg region. Either way, they only come from Rochberg, which is the region that houses Fangorn Forest, as you would expect. But you can just head down there and pick them up early doors. I'm fairly certain they are mercenaries, but you'll find out in your games. You'll find them if you'll find them. They are available to you. And they're very, very useful, but they are costly. Their upkeep is very high, but it's nice playing the enemy at their own game and using trolls against them, which I find is often quite fun. And that concludes then the Lothlorien roster. Now what we need to do is actually pay attention so that we can keep these Gor Veleg out of harm's way so that we can actually use them. Something we do want to do is turn off that so that we can fire at them with them when we want. Now we've got to watch out because the enemy, as you can see, are desperate to flank us, but we want to be able to then flank them. You can have a guess if you want who we're up against, but it's ridiculously obvious with the 2 units out on the edges. You will have noticed those already. Look, we've got a unit perfectly placed. Right, getting close, getting close. There's some temple wards here. Temple wards, temple wards. Turn, 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 turn. We've got it, we've got it, we've got it. Lock and load. I know you do that with a gun and not with a bow. But here we go. Firing their 3 arrows, as you can see, and away they go. You will note that if we do just pause it, there are multiple arrows, and they do just completely shred their enemy. So there are 128 temple wards at the moment, and a full volley of Gor Veleg right into the heart of them, and they've taken nearly 30 of them out. Oh, it's Sauron himself! Quickly, 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 someone shoot at Sauron. No, you're never going to do it. Run away, run away, run away, run away, run away, run away. Damn it, the trolls arrived. Keep going, keep running, you stupid fools. Oh no, now the beasts are here. Oh, it's all over. So you got 1 volley off, but the enemy really does not want us shooting this unit. But you saw there that they have 3 arrows each. So they only have 4 arrows to fire per man, but that is actually, of course, 12 arrows per person. So they can fire quite a lot. They are so deadly if the enemy groups up. So if this were, for example, let's say the Gurthanen was our unit and all of this was the enemy, we would just shred everything that was there. If they fire all of their arrows, they really can drop thousands of enemy units if used well. I've just given you an example of how not to use them, but the temple wardens, the temple knights, that litter the field and are dying in the grass there can attest to their lethality. But of course, they are actually quite poor, as we've already covered, in melee. They do have a high attack of 11, but the defense of 11, primarily in defense, split between defense and armor, isn't very good. They don't like being shot at, and big elite late game units will just end them with no trouble, like the Great Beasts are doing. It is, of course, Mordor that we're up against. You guessed that when you saw Sauron was on the field. Remember, or something I should explain, which we'll explain more in the Mordor episode, but do remember that Sauron does not appear in custom battle, so the actual model that is Sauron only appears in the campaign. But this is his unit, and it even has a unique banner, which I think is cool. So you know all the time where Sauron is, because he's the only one with a giant eye looking at you. The other Mordor banners are muted and dark red. You can't really tell from afar what they are. It's just a block of black and red. But the Sauron eye is noticeable really wherever you are. You can always see the eye staring back at you. Sauron's unit, I think, has been buffed for version 5 because we really want this unit to just be absolutely overwhelmingly powerful. And I think it looks very, very cool. But that's all for the Mordor overview. For now, that will conclude the Lothlorien overview as our army gets absolutely wrecked by these great beasts bursting through our lines. There's some Gallatin Swordmen up against Faerûn Mercs. They're fighting their way through, but the great beasts are turned on them, and they're knocking them away with their heads. They kill about 3 or 4 elves per little head bob that they do. This is the only time where Medieval 2, I think, really shows its age. You'll note the textures underneath the neck are stretched, and the unit doesn't blink or anything like that. But considering, of course, Warhammer is the game for beasts. If you're in it for beasts, then Warhammer 2 is your game. But I don't think that looks that bad. Considering how old this engine is, I think that's holding up quite nicely. Particularly the guy who's riding it and looks like he's about to have his legs snapped in half. He's sitting so wide. They do have javelins as well. But again, that's for the Mordor overview. But for now, that concludes this video. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. I did retweak my microphone because I undid the changes I'd made to the mic quality, and I then listened to it back again, and I just couldn't stand the peaks and spikes that my voice had. So I did the microphone thing, and now before every recording I'm just going to have to adjust the microphone volume, but that's a small price to pay for excellence, I think. But until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Naden Perimad Melunin, and farewell.